was wrong to say I wouldn't change a thing, 'cause in the story of our lives, the best of times through color glass, time rolls on enough to let me move on past, but every little now and then it creeps on back to shade my smile.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live from the deep woods of Western Georgia on this April 29th, 2025. Tonight, we cover the subject of astrology. We have a brand new guest for you tonight that we will be introducing in the second and third hours. Of course, at first hour, we're going to cover some of the questions that have come in from the ether. Of course, we've been out for 2 weeks too, so things have been building up. Lots of crazy internet issues, some new announcements to tell, stories to tell. It's crazy stuff. And we've got 3 hours to talk about it, so don't go anywhere. Well, hello, everybody. Once again, this is your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, with my co-host, Jamie Wolf.
Hey, everybody.
And it's been quite a crazy experience here, as it always is, and it's always internet-related, but I think we are finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel with all of this internet nonsense that has made this season, particularly season 11, one of the most difficult seasons to produce that we've ever had. And we've always had internet issues ever since moving to the deep woods, right? Been 3 years now, and we've had trouble each season, some more than others, but this has been really bad. We've had to cancel already 2 episodes this season so far. Last week wasn't a cancellation, it was Holy Week, and I hope everybody had a wonderful Holy Week and a very celebratory Easter. I hope you're enjoying the Easter season as I am. I've got some good rest, mostly. But as you all know, I've been trying to get away from this terrible internet that we have with AT&T. And it's not that AT&T is so much the problem, it's the fact that they don't service fiber in our location because we're in a rural, remote area. So we're lucky we can get what we got. It's I've said it before, it's a 50 megabyte download speed with a 10 megabyte upload speed, and that's best case scenario. Sometimes we don't hit that. And we've had all sorts of crazy issues for those last 3 years. And finally, I convinced them to come out. They finally came out, and they did some work at the main hub twice, where they shut us down, and we had no internet for about 24 hours. And they found that our own wire to this house was spliced into 6 different pieces, and 5 of those pieces were just lying in the mud. So that was breaking up the signal. I've already talked about this. And they fixed all of it. And it's been a solid connection ever since. So we were very grateful. And we thought, well, when fiber finally does come to this area, at least we got this now. Well, guess what? Fiber finally came to this area, but not with AT&T, with our power company. And so I jumped on it. As soon as it was available, I said, you know what? We're running. We're not walking. We're running to this. And it actually is about half the price of what we're currently getting with AT&T. Now, here's the interesting part of it. Okay, they came to put in the fiber line. They called me and said, "We want to run the fiber line to your house." I said, well, I didn't know it was available yet. Oh, it's not available yet. We just want to get your house ready for it. So it's like, okay. You know, you need permission to come onto this property. It's gated. So they were calling to schedule when they could actually come onto the property to run, which, as you know, is 1,000 foot or 2,000. And they actually told me it was 2,000 feet of cable that they needed. And I was all ready to say, like, sooner the better, just do it. Okay. And they told me it was going to be an area line. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine. 2,000 feet of aerial line's interesting, but go ahead. It's a power company. What the hell? Well, it turns out that it wasn't an aerial line. It was a buried line. And the person that they sent out to bury it ran the machine that digs into the ground right over the AT&T line, completely disintegrating this line. Now, they took no responsibility for it. They blamed AT&T for it by saying, well, they didn't flag it properly. Well, my response to them was, well, if it wasn't flagged properly, then why didn't you call me and say, we can't run this without the risk of damaging your current line?
They have equipment to find those buried wires.
Of course, it's called a locator.
Yes.
It's called a locator.
Yes.
They just didn't want to do that. And so it was back and forth. So we have been without the internet here for almost 1 week. We just got it back yesterday, just in time for the show. And thankfully this happened the day after Holy Week. So Holy Week was not disrupted, but we had a whole week without it, which is tough for me because I run I run not just the church from here mostly, but I run my own business from here. And so I was completely shut down. I can't even begin to calculate some of the losses we incurred as the result of not being able to connect. I don't even want to think about it, to be honest. And I was very upset, and they sent several guys out here to try to fix it. And they kept saying they found the break, and they'd find the break. They'd splice it together, still no internet. Eventually AT&T did come out, and they said, your line is shredded. We can't repair it. We're going to have to run a new one. So here's the interesting thing about this whole thing. They ran the new one. It's better than ever. Right now, it's better than it's ever been. It's a solid connection. There's no latency practically. You're probably getting a really good signal right now watching us. And it's only for the next week because fiber is activated next week. So the next show should be a fiber connection. 1 gigabyte up, 1 gigabyte down, and with the option to upgrade to 2 gigabytes up, 2 gigabytes down. And even the 2 gigabyte up and down is still cheaper than what I'm paying currently for 50 down and 10 up. And the 1 gigabyte is half the price of what I'm paying for what I currently am using right now. So it's definitely worth doing. I could have done without the headache, but it's definitely worth doing. But what I would like to know is, they ran, okay, the power company ran that fiber cable in about an hour and 15 minutes. All right. AT&T came out, ran a brand new one, 2,000 feet, right? About the same amount of time. Why did Comcast tell me that this was going to cost $30,000 to run this line? That's what I want to know. It's kind of like, saying that we're going to put, 200% tariffs on China. That's not a tariff at that point. That's called an embargo.
Yeah.
So when Comcast told me that, it's $30,000 to run a line, you're basically just saying, we don't want you as a customer, because there is absolutely no way any reasonable person would pay that, even if they, even if they're made of money, no one would do that. Okay. And I don't understand why anybody would ask, even quote such a price when it literally was about an hour's and a half's worth of work. I would love to know how you make, $15,000 a half hour or whatever that amounts to. But I want that job.
The wrong business.
Yeah. I'm in the wrong business too, because $15,000 every hour, $30,000 an hour and a half. Yeah, I'll take it. What a crazy bunch of crap that was. So yeah, I can't recommend Comcast. AT&T has been good to us locally, at least, and the power company. Well, I'm not too pleased with.
Yet to be seen.
Yet to be seen. Not too pleased with what I've seen so far. But hey, for fiber, I think it's worth it. For you guys, definitely worth it. So we'll see how it goes. Joining us from Australia, we have Father Chris Yates. How you doing tonight, Father?
I'm doing all right. I'm always minded when people say there's light at the end of the tunnel, of the quip, but it could be a train coming the other way.
Yeah. Well, it has been a few times, hasn't it? It has been. And I wonder whether they put down your new cable they cut through the fiber. Well, he told me. Well, he hasn't buried that one yet.
Okay.
So but he did tell me that when he dug, he made sure that that nothing, that he didn't interfere with the fiber, and he also spray painted where the fiber was. But right. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not letting AT&T come out there to bury it until we've got fiber connected, and I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up AT&T until I know fiber stays working. So
that's the thing with these old companies, isn't it? I mean, they drive us mad. I mean, we have Telstra here in Australia. They're kind of infamous. Yeah. Anyone that needs to phone Telstra customer service is like, you sort of pray, you gather the whole church to pray for them while they're on the phone. Like it's like they're doing an exorcism.
Yeah.
And so, but at the same time, they do tend to take responsibility for things. So it's one of them, in it. They're sort of they're a pain to deal with, but they actually it doesn't surprise me, for example, that they came and sorted out the cable connection in the end.
Yes.
So anyway,
well, he told me,
things are fine here.
He actually AT&T actually told me, they said, look, we're going to fix your line whether you stay with us or not. But he says, if you've got an option to go with fiber, take the fiber.
I mean, it's a no-brainer.
I think that's what you get from an established company, right?
Yeah.
You get a bit more of that in the end. But the things are fine here. But just like your crazy top hat northern neighbours, we're anticipating an election on Saturday. Here. So
I'll pray for you all then.
Well, indeed.
Yeah.
Election fever is here, and I mean, because voting is compulsory in Australia, you get fined if you don't turn up to vote.
Oh, that's freedom.
You can. Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. You can throw your ballot in the bin, but you have to turn up. You have to turn up and get your name scrolled. And also it has the most complicated system in the world. So at a federal level, if you don't check every box in numerical order of preferences, your vote won't count. So they sort of make you vote, and then you have to vote for everybody, even if you hate them.
Even if you hate them.
So by the way, if there's 20 candidates on the ballot, you got to number them 1 to 20 in the order that you want. Otherwise, your vote doesn't count. And then you also vote for the senators. Now, this ballot paper was slightly less than 3 years ago, but it's still, I don't know. I mean, I can't actually show you on the screen because it's much wider than my hands will allow me to go.
Oh, my
because
God.
the number of names on it. And you can either vote above the line, which is sort of, then you vote, the preferences go to whoever the parties want you to, which is, of course, if you're anything like me, you don't want. Or you vote below the line, where you have to number at least 12 boxes, and there can be an unlimited number of people that stand for the Senate below the line. So I did, however, learn that there was a stated case that if you voted in Roman numerals, it had to be counted. So I thought, just to sort of drive them mad on election day, I'll vote in, because I voted early. I'll vote in Roman numerals. So I look forward to them.
I think we should just do things conclave way. We'll burn the black smoke, the white smoke, and just have fun with it.
Well, and then the other thing is, because voting is compulsory here, and you get by the way, at the state level they have preferences, but they're voluntary, so people get confused. They turn up to the federal thinking they don't have to preference everyone, so their votes don't count. It's almost as though the two-party system's got a vested interest in making it complicated. And so, but because it's compulsory, they open up voting early, so it's actually been open for over a week already, which means that instead of having an election day, we have an election season. So it's even worse than you can imagine.
I don't even want to imagine it. Sounds awful. Sounds awful. Joining us from Tennessee, we have Brandon Milam. How you doing tonight, Brandon?
I'm pretty good. Father Christian might want to consider moving to the States here for that one because it's voluntary here.
You can spot it's voluntary in the UK as well. I could move back there. I think Australia is one of the only places in the world. Supposed democracies in the world where they make you vote.
Yeah.
Well, they make you turn up. I must clarify that.
I would never wish our political system on anybody. So, you got a place here if you want to move, but I wouldn't recommend it until things, temper down to maybe about 300 years. Maybe about 300 years, then it's safe to move.
Tom Holman would meet me at the border and send me out. Anyway, sorry, Brandon,
honestly, you could get sponsorship through this church, so it would be very possible for you. It would be. Okay, well, let's get started with questions from the ether. I know, we've gone 2 weeks without it, so there's always some interesting questions that come in, and Brandon's got 3 of them for us. So go ahead, Brandon. What's our first one?
Right, so the first one is, I did some research and I figured out how both Christianity and Islam trace their origins back to Abraham, Jacob with Christianity, and Ishmael with Islam. But since there are figures in Genesis and therefore a metaphorical book, how are the two religions tracing their lineage back to an individual who, historically speaking, did not exist?
Well, all history, after you go back far enough, assuming you have enough distance between whatever point in time you happen to be at and the time that you're referencing, which is, almost a type of prehistory, really. It starts to enter into what I call legendary territory. All right. You start to enter into the realm of legends. And that's because given enough time, things get remembered a certain way or rewritten a certain way or told a certain way. Things get attached to events that happen. Now, this is not to suggest that these people weren't real, at least real if we're talking real in a sense of a historical context. There's nothing to say that Moses and Abraham were not truly historical figures. But what is important, I think, to take away from this is that whether or not there's historical relevance to them is less important than what they represent as far as the theology is concerned. So a better way of perhaps understanding this is how the Chinese look at the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors of ancient China. When you go back to the first dynasty, these are legendary, almost superhuman kind of figures. Now, was there a first emperor of China? Yeah, of course there had to have been a first one, because we know that we had so many of them, and these are historically verifiable, at least to a certain point. So there had to be a start to this empire, and there was obviously an emperor that ran it. Was he this legendary, superhuman, demigod kind of person? Probably not. But that's the legendary aspect that gets infused into the entire character of the story, the culture, or whatever. And this is what we've said so many times in this show, what I've told my students so many times, that myth is both greater and truer than history. And these kinds of things prove it, because myth talks to us at a level that's beyond history, and I would say is beyond fact. If you could imagine that, I think what's hard for people to understand, okay, is that fact is not the highest reality when it comes to something being true. It's actuality. But actuality is very broad, okay? It doesn't follow any kind of tangible scientific rules. It is much greater, much more transcendent than that. And so religion taps into that higher actuality that doesn't necessarily depend upon things like history and scientific observation to be able to validate itself. It's validated at a level of truth that's much more profound than that. Now, you can't explain this to a materialist or a nihilist or a scientist. You can, an atheist. You can't explain that kind of thing because they're too myopic. And in order to be a true philosopher, you have to be the opposite of myopic. You have to have a very expansive approach to everything. And I'm not talking open mind, and I'm not talking being credulous either. I'm just simply saying you have to have a greater scope of possibilities and being able to objectively explore each and every one of those possibilities, which is what we do on this show. And we talked about in the earlier parts of this season, simulation theory. I don't present these things as if they're my own opinions or something that I personally believe in. I don't choose these topics based upon what I believe. I choose them because they are part of my philosophical musings that help to expand my understanding of the universe. And I recognize in that the universe is much greater than anything I could possibly imagine it to be. And that, unfortunately, for people that put all their eggs in the basket of science, or even those that put all their eggs in the baskets of faith and religion, you're still limiting yourself. It's still greater than that, and I don't think there's any Catholic, at least, maybe there's some Christians that certainly would argue with this, but I don't think there's any Catholic that would argue with what I'm about to say, that even if we were to have a complete and perfect understanding of Christian theology, that wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface of the reality of God. Wouldn't even begin. It's just enough for us to comprehend.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If we understood all the mysteries of the universe in a scientific method, actually, everybody would believe in God, but we would not have exhausted what is available to the human mind to understand and experience. And if I might say a couple of things about, first of all, the Christians trace their connection back to Abraham through Jesus Christ. Now, yes, that then goes on beyond, backwards from Jesus to the ancestry of his mother. Mm-hmm. But in other words, Christians base their connection on Jesus Christ, and the evidence for that is that he rose from the dead, which is something that people believe by faith because of the accounts of those that witnessed it. Right. So it's not, so I want to push back slightly on the premise of the question. The Islamic tracing back to Ishmael is, in my opinion, far more dubious, but I would say that to coin a phrase. And so I think that's an important thing to mention. That the other thing I want to say is when people ask, what's the archaeological evidence that supports blah blah, or what's the evidence that suggests these people were real? The one piece of evidence they ignore are the scriptures. Like it's as though these scriptures
they don't count.
They don't count. Yeah, it's though they were written yesterday by us.
Yeah, I know.
That is a form of evidence. I mean, if an archaeologist received a story of a trial of somebody in ancient Egypt, they wouldn't say, "Oh, but is it true or not?" They'd say, "Oh, look at this! We discovered this evidence of this trial that happened in ancient Egypt." The only text that has that criticism applied to it is the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. Interestingly, there's a lack of interest in delving into the Quran in a similar manner.
I know, isn't that interesting? I mean, well, maybe not as interesting as it might appear, because I think I know the answer to that one, and I think you do too.
Very straightforward.
Yeah. But the fact is, I find it kind of humorous when these people that make these arguments will cite, I've seen atheists cite Josephus as evidence against a particular thing. It's like, well, why is Josephus all of a sudden like the authority now? Yeah. I mean, why? What is it about him?
Because he's not a Christian.
Yeah, because he's not a Christian.
Pliny the Elder, or anybody else has got authority.
He found something to hang
St.
on
Paul
to.
has no authority at all.
That's right. Yeah. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, Scripture has stood the test of time. It's proven itself, through 2,000 years of durability. It's the most published book in the world. Nothing's even come close to it. There's more copies of it than anything else. There's got to be something to that. You can't just dismiss that as fairy tale. It's had a profound effect on Western civilization and also every other civilization in the world, perhaps predominantly Western civilization, but every part of this world has been touched and affected by it, right down from our system of law to what we understand to be a code of ethics. This is all scriptural. It's all biblical. So there's
and it extends even to the freedom that democracies extend.
Yeah, that's
to
true.
Allowing people to say, I don't believe it, and I think it's a load of rubbish. Yeah. In other words, there couldn't be atheism without Christianity.
That's true.
That's the paradox.
It is true. You're right. And I mean, that's exactly right, because we have the understanding of freedom at the level that the Gospels give us. It allows for people to actually have an opposing view like that. You're right. I mean, instead of it becoming a restrictive kind of, totalitarian. Yeah, totalitarianism is the word I was looking for. Thank you. So there you go. That's the answer, Brendan.
And is that similar in a way to I guess was Rome's founding with Romulus and Remus? Is that the same kind of?
Well, that's a legend to try to explain. That's a little bit different because I don't. Even the Romans would not have considered necessarily Romulus and Remus to be historical figures. I mean, divine figures, perhaps, that might have played a role in history, but that's very different, I think, than how how Scripture places Abraham and Moses into the timeline. It's similar. I'm not going to say it's not, but I would say that Romulus and Remus were created. These were stories created in much more of the way that Hindus create divine stories about the gods to kind of express some type of truth in a way that people can understand them. They don't take this as literal history. They're writing an allegory to try to explain something that's at a deeper, more profound level. I believe we could say that about Romulus and Remus and how the Romans would have looked at that. But when the Jewish people refer to Abraham and Moses, this was done in a far more historical way. They saw a lineage there. They understood them to be actual people. And while, yes, there's going to be embellishments through time, legends grow around legendary people. I mean, that's what makes them legendary. It's not to diminish any historical value there. Same thing with Jesus. I mean, it's a tall order today to convince someone that, you could have God incarnate a human being and die and rise from the dead and then, give you the grace to do the same. That's a very difficult thing for people today to accept. And they might look at that and say, well, that's legend in the same way that Romulus and Remus were Roman legends. But I would caution to say that, but it wasn't written that way. Okay. The Gospels were not written as legends first that people started to believe. They were written as actual first-hand accounts. They make that very clear, particularly Luke. Luke is very explicit about this. And Paul is too, through his letters. Somebody saw something. A lot of people saw something.
Yeah.
And they wrote it down.
And a lot of people died for it.
Yes, and a lot of people died for it.
Died swearing it was true.
And that, you just brought up,
Yep.
Jamie, an extremely important part of it, because I think that is the best argument one could make for, if you could say, well, why should we believe in the Gospels? Well, it doesn't make sense that if you know you're lying, if you know you've been lying all this time, that you're probably not going to die for that lie. Most people are not going to die for their lies, but you might die for a truth. If you're a man of integrity, which I believe the apostles and disciples were, then yes, I do believe you would die for the truth.
I mean, they were handpicked for a reason.
Yeah. So I think that, so it's a little bit different. It's similar in some ways, but you got to understand that Roman legends and even these Chinese legends that we talked about, Hindu stories of the divine, are composed with a different motivation than what was happening in the Jewish world at the time that both the Old Testament was being utilized and the New Testament was being written. There was a very different motivation behind those texts. They were not writing stuff down to say, well, let's create the next big myth. That was not really how they did things. Remember, Jewish people, even today, they're very practical, very down to earth kind of people. All right. They're people that work, and they're very successful at what they put their mind to. It almost becomes a stereotype for them because they're so successful at things like business and everything because of that practicality. And they're smart. They're not the kind of people to make shit up just because their culture demands it. That's just not the way they operate. Now, there are, of course, as we've talked about, there's a dimension of the ineffable in the Old Testament and the New Testament too, but more so in the Old Testament for the purposes of this conversation, that, they understand that there's just certain things that you can't talk about when it refers to God. There's just certain things the human brain can't understand. So the next best thing is to tell a story that explains it a little, enough for the human mind to comprehend it, but it's not being written with the intention for it to be like, oh yeah, this is a historical thing that happened on such and such a date, which is why they don't remember that, the dates are not necessarily always important. They are with certain things like chronicles and stuff like that. But, when it comes to people like the true legendary figures of Judaism, like Abraham and Moses, it's less so important about the times that this happened, and more so about what these things mean. And what it means is that God chose this people to directly commune with in a profound way that was never before seen before. Never before seen. Okay? And that's what it's trying to say. Somebody fulfilled that role. Now, maybe the guy's name wasn't Moses. Maybe that's just the name that's given to the person that had these experiences. And, maybe, the climbing up, Mount Sinai and tablets of stone and all this were the embellishments to tell this greater story. But one thing's for certain, somebody had a divine experience. God spoke to them, gave them a code of ethics that brought us into the realm of modernity, civility. These are things that did not exist prior to this. Something profound changed.
And truth is tested by experience.
Yes.
So, this is why. The burning bush. That image of what cannot be consumed by fire. What a great image of part of the explanation of the nature of God. And this is why, Jordan Peterson's done his Exodus series. And he, yes, he's got biblical scholars, Jewish and Christian and archaeologists and psychologists and artists discussing these things. The fact that these images accounts, we all have mountaintop experiences. We know what that means.
Yeah.
We all know what it means to be consumed. We know what it means to be sent. We know what it means to sacrifice. They're so deep. They're like super truths. And the fact that these are contained in these stories that have survived for thousands of years and and they're still alive today because we speak them, and meditate on them. I don't know if people can't see that they're true, I don't know what can convince you that they're true.
Well, and that's my thing.
They're self-evidently true.
I think it really, and that's what I've said before. It's that there's a level of truth that these things transcend themselves to, and if you're willing to go on that journey, it takes you with it to that same point of transcendence. That if at some point it were to ever be definitively, determined, without any shadow of a doubt, that Jesus was merely just a fictitious story, it wouldn't change my faith any at all.
No, it wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter to me. I know there are people that are absolutely dependent upon the historicity of the events in the gospel to the point that their
because they're
faith will be
caught in
shattered.
materialism.
They are.
They're caught. It's a materialistic worldview.
Exactly.
And that's what. And actually, it is incompatible with certainly with the Christian faith. I suspect with all faith.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, if you're going to enter into the spiritual life, that has to go at some point. Now, it can be quite a process because I think in a lot of ways that's people's greatest attachment. It's not so much, and we talk about like the signs and symptoms of the disease, like people that obsess over money or power or whatever your particular poison might be. But those are just symptoms. The real disease is an attachment to materialism, to the material world, to needing to be validated in your reality. You need to know.
And people need to realize how recent that is.
Yeah, I know.
That materialism is actually, there's nothing ancient about that.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's a 19th, 20th century phenomenology. But it sort of pretends to be something which is, it's seductive. Ironically, when people had far less, in other words, they had more need of material things like food and clean water and all the rest of it, they were far less material.
Yeah.
So it's a really recent way of thinking, and I think people, my advice to people who have grown up in, well, we've all grown up in it, who are caught up in it, is to question actually what's the point of materialism and existentialism. It can only lead to nihilism. Mm-hmm.
And it has, and there's
no deep meaning in it. It's meaningless, and that's why people, look where people are committing suicide. Mm-hmm. It's in the wealthiest countries in the world, where they don't starve, where the government will, there is a bottom line safety net for everybody. They are, suicide rates in Scandinavia are startlingly high,
and that's like supposed to be the happiest place in the world. It's
supposed to be this social utopia. Well, that's why you need a degree of struggle in your life. That's why, I mean, if we mentioned Jacob earlier, Jacob gets called Israel, one who wrestles with God. Mm-hmm. He's wounded forever from that encounter. Yeah. But that encounter is vivifying, gives him life. Yeah. And materialism says, satiate yourself with everything you can gather in.
Right.
It doesn't, it destroys the soul. We get fat and suicidal.
We do. There you go, Brandon.
So reject it.
Don't get fat and suicidal. That's the moral of that question. What's our next one?
So the next one, how do you differentiate between demon possession and mental health crisis? I've been reading up on signs of the stages of demonic possession, and the first three for sure look a lot like mental break, except for the aversion to religious artifacts.
I mean, this is probably the most asked question of me when it comes to things, when people are always wanting to interview me about my work. Or I actually received, I didn't hear back from her, but I received an email from a student this past week who is writing some paper on the dangers of I guess she's claiming, if I remember correctly, that these therapists, or that it's becoming more and more common for therapists to diagnose possession and refer them over to the church. I mean, I don't think that's
sure
true.
Haven't gotten to our clients.
They sure
are
not
several
now,
right now.
Because I do not find that to be true.
I'm waiting on psyche valves from them, and
yeah,
If they don't want to provide it, then
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to talk to her. She hasn't responded back to my email. I mean, I said, sure, I'll be more than happy to give you an interview, but I'd like to know
never
where
heard
she's
of
getting
that.
that basis
Yeah.
from. But anyway, it sounded a bit biased to me, to be honest. But I'd like to see what facts she's drawing from. Anyway, the answer to it is much more pragmatic than I think people give credit for, because I think, from Ghost Adventures and everything else, I used to joke about it. I still do. People think that Jamie and I just go door to door, knocking on people's doors, barging in with holy water and a cross, and start exercising the hell out of everything. That is just not the reality of this job.
No.
In the most basic terms, okay, all claims that we receive, every case we receive, is treated as mental illness first. All right, until the conventional therapeutics fail. That's when we start to say, okay, so they've done everything the right way. They've gone through the process, the medical process, and what's available to us in that regard is, of course, psychotropic medication, conventional therapy. And I'm a big critic of those things. I am, because I was on that side first before coming into the religious side of treating people's psychological and emotional health, because it's really what pastors do. I mean, well, you can call it, religion or spirituality, but in the end, it really is. You're just another type.
And those tablets are far more speculative than pastoral ministry.
It is. Well, you're right. You're right. And I could not, in good conscience, continue in psychology, which is why I went the path of religion, because I found more value here than there in terms of getting people well. I saw better success rates, far better success rates in the pastoral arena, which is why I switched. But that doesn't mean that we don't still follow a process. So, so the big marker for us is, okay, you claim you demonically possessed, oppressed, obsessed, whatever. Then what is? Let me look at your psychological profile. Oh, you never been for one. Oh, what? You don't even have a counselor. Okay, well, guess what? You got to do that first, and then after so many months of this, you will revisit this. Now, that doesn't mean I won't work with them pastorally, but overall, before there's even going to be a minor exorcism, let alone a solemn exorcism, we're going to need absolute validation by a professional therapist, somebody that's qualified to diagnose, is practicing, therapy, and the licenses that support that. We've tried these things and they're not working. Then at that point, we try the pastoral tools. And this still does not imply that we're going to jump right into exorcism. I can't tell you right now, it's the worst it's ever been. It never used to be this bad. Now it's this bad. It's worse than this bad. It's so bad that every case, it seems, we get now is that, when our intake form asks to describe the problem, they'll just say, I'm possessed. I need an exorcism.
And they don't.
Exclamation point. I need an exorcism.
I'm dealing with most of these folks. And
yeah.
One thing I can interject too, it's all in the interview. One thing some people need to remember to ask me, probably coming from law enforcement, what's your drug use like? Have you ever used drugs? Have you ever used hallucinogens? And we have a client now who believes, I'll keep it generic, who believes that their afterlife is in danger because they saw a demon while they were tripping on shrooms. Well, honey, you were tripping on shrooms. So that's going to be something, you need to be clean for what was 6 months before we can. That would be
what I would look for.
We need to get this stuff out of your body before we can even address what might be going on with you.
That's the equivalent of saying I'm a better driver when I'm drunk, officer.
Yeah, it's just practical stuff you got to ask. It's like if you're using hard drugs and you feel that you're in spiritual crisis, could it be the hard drugs, or could you be compensating for a mental illness or depression or anxiety?
Well, sometimes they just want an excuse.
Yeah.
And so it becomes easier to say, rather than say I'm mentally ill, than to say that, I'm being attacked by a demon.
Yeah, it's kind of hard for us to help you if you're under the influence of drugs all the time.
Right.
We had one guy that
One of
drunk.
the issues is it can be both at the same time. You know,
Well, that's the other issue.
Before.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about
I mean,
that.
Yeah, I mean, if you are possessed, you're going to have mental health
Yeah,
problems.
there's gonna be
right?
consequences.
And chances are it's not you that's going to be complaining. It's going to be your family or your loved one.
But I mean,
Yeah.
these things don't happen in a vacuum. They're not in isolation from each other. So my argument to anybody that asks this question is considering at least from a Christian vantage point, okay? Because usually this question comes to us from a Christian vantage point. Not always, but we're going to take it from that perspective for a moment. And that is, illness is the result of the fallen world. So is there really a difference anyway? I mean, in the end, does it really matter if you want to call something a demonic possession or a mental illness? In the end, it is still the direct result of the fallen world. So the only part that matters here is what is the best solution to heal the patient. Okay, and so that's usually going to be the path of least resistance. Sometimes all it takes is a little bit of therapy, a little bit of emotional support, and the person starts to build their life back again, which is why the pastoral side is so much better, because unlike a conventional therapist, a pastor is going to be there for you all the time and is going to be coming from a long-term and more of a familial type of support system. It's more like having a grandfather than it is like having a doctor. Okay, so
and one that has a family, because that's what the rest of the church.
That's what the church is. I mean, idealistically, of course, we know that that's not always the way it manifests in all parishes, but that's the ideal. That's what we should be striving for. So, in this sense that, so after we get through, a person comes to us, they've done everything right with the psychotherapy or they've seen their doctor, nothing can be found that's wrong on any kind of medical level. Then we start exploring what could be spiritually wrong, and that still does not imply exorcism. What it will usually mean is sacraments. When's the last time you've been to confession? When's the last time you received the Eucharist? Usually the answer to these questions is never. So that's part of the problem,
Yeah. When's the last time you were in church?
What is that, right? When was the last time you were in church?
You're coming for a Christian solution, but you haven't been to been to mass or worship
and no desire to actually
no desire to start again.
No desire to start again. You just want someone to come and do a quick fix, put the Band-Aid on so you can go back to your miserable life, continuing with the things that caused this in the first place. And that's also
no commitment beyond the encounter either.
Never.
Right.
Never.
And this is one of the other distinctions is that with mental health problems, they tend to slowly improve over a period of time. It takes time. Mm-hmm. With if someone truly is possessed and they're going through the exorcism progress, they actually get worse.
Yeah, they get downhill quick.
They get worse and worse and worse over a period of time.
Yeah.
Then better.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for priests to see the difference in terms of how they respond to prayer and whether they'll respond by embracing the sacraments in the first place, but also how it plays out. So, for those who are seeking, and look, people who are in psychological turmoil, spiritual turmoil, my heart breaks. That's what we're here for. That's why we do what we do. So we are all ears for you. But if you're looking to shortcut a way to health, I've got bad news for you.
It's not going to work
the exorcism route is not the shortcut.
No, it's not. And so we're going to go through the sacraments and, your unction. And it's only once, we start to see through that process something more of what we would classify as demonic reveal itself. And then and only then would we start to jump to the more extreme types of things. And remember, let's not forget what exorcism is, okay? People think it's like some kind of like really dark and dirty secret. It's a blessing. In the end, it's a blessing.
It's a blessing on steroids.
That's it. It's it.
Yeah.
It's a blessing. Okay? I mean, you're basically giving grace so that the person can get their life back. And that's all it really is. And if
And it
anybody,
may not be God's will that be ended.
Yeah,
I mean, we
right.
said it before. Padre Pio was possessed.
yeah,
He's a saint.
Yeah.
yeah. Of course, yeah. But a lot of the Desert Fathers had their brushes with mostly oppression, but still demonic.
Yeah.
I mean, demonic encounters. So it's part of the spiritual process to deal with it. I mean, I've dealt with my own oppressions through this work, and I have to deal with it the same way anybody else would. Just because I'm an exorcist doesn't exempt me from it. Okay, so granted, I do have the grace of holy orders. That does help. I'm not going to deny that it doesn't. However, most of the time, though, that's pretty much reserved for everybody else. For my own spirituality, I have to work it out. I have to work out my salvation the same way anyone else does.
Yeah. I think people tend to forget that.
I think they do.
Even the strongest among us still deal with the same temptations and oppressions that everybody else does. Maybe we just have a better way of dealing with it because we've been properly trained. And how do you get trained? You go to church. You take the sacraments. You use discernment.
Yeah.
You read.
Yeah.
read the words of those who've gone before us.
Jamie, that's where I think police work is a crossover with it.
Because, absolutely.
People think that church people, especially priests and religious and
They forget we're
policemen,
human too. Yeah.
Yeah, they just go home and get plugged into a USB port.
Right.
We have
glass in
to.
case
We've
of
done
emergency.
a lot of hard work. Yeah, you have to do a lot of hard work to get where you are.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And so, that's actually what draws people to us in the first place, by the way.
I think so. So it ultimately it's pastoral work. But people are like, I can't believe you go on ghost adventures. You just come on in and without without speaking to their doctors or it's like you don't even know the processes that go on here. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a pastor making a house call to somebody that's asking for the help of the church, somebody that they want to come and pray for them or with them. I'm sorry. I just don't see what's so dangerous about that. I don't get it. I don't see what you're so worried about. What you're worried about that they might find faith, they might find God in this process, maybe live a healthy life.
How
after
dare
that.
you respond to somebody who needs help?
Yeah, how dare you? Yeah.
I mean, give me a break. But I mean, to get back to the question though, the question is that's how you tell the difference. There is no difference. You go with the process. Okay, and then you do what works, and what works is that you start with the path of least resistance. You do the most practical thing, and then you work your way up to the more complicated solutions if the ones below it fail. And that's it's as simple as that. But it's a process. There's no magic to it. You're just simply working with what you've got to work with, and that's what any good pastor would do. All right, what's our next question? We got 5 minutes. I think we can do it.
So the final question is, actually, we can do the one in chat.
That's what I was going to say, because we got a concerned mom in the chat.
We'll try to get through both of them. Let's see what we can do.
Okay, so the one from the chat was, my son recently started meditating. I've heard that meditating can open up the mind so much that it can possibly be an opening for the demonic.
I mean,
Also for the divine.
Anything can be either or, right? I mean, I love a good martini. I enjoy a good cocktail, but I mean, I also know that there are people that absolutely destroy their lives with alcohol. Okay. For me, it's a wonderful way to celebrate something with friends and to sit and have a nice, quiet, philosophical conversation. It's engaging. It can help your mind to sort of relax so that you can think more clearly. And then there are people that it clouds their judgment to the degree that they lose all reason.
Right. It's a maturity factor.
It is. And meditation is as neutral as any of those things. I mean, like food can be also a vice or a wonderful, way to bond with your family. You could turn it into an eating disorder, or you can make it out to be a way that everyone sits down together at least for a couple hours and talks without cell phones in their face. You know, I mean, you can use anything for divine or demonic purposes. It's really up to you what you plan to do, or what. Yes, maturity is the big thing.
What are you trying to get out of it?
What are you trying to get out? So there's a little bit of intent there, but at the same time, even more important than intent is what is your constitution like? I mean, if you're a kind of person that is seeking some kind of fanciful solution to a problem, well, then meditation might be a way to further your delusions. If you're looking as a way to, manage anxiety, to get a clearer focus so that you can, be more productive in your job, that's going to lead to good things. If you're talking about spirituality only, well, I mean, if you're meditating on the life of Christ, if you're meditating on the cross, there's going to be great, profound wisdom that comes to you. If you're using meditation as a way of seeking some kind of, power for yourself, well, I mean, that could be problematic. So there's no answer to this. It comes down to, how serious of a person you are about what it is that you're doing. Now, I would say you never do anything half-assed. If you're going to go into it half-assed, then don't do it. All right. There's way too much half-assery out there right now. Well, far too much. Like the guy that cut my half-assery. Yes. We're going to have a whole lexicon by the time we're done with this show. But like the guy that damaged my line, that's a half-assed job. You shouldn't be doing that. All right. Find another job, because if that's your best work, then this is not good. Okay. Same thing goes with meditation. If you're willing to go into it seriously, understanding its power, knowing how you're going to utilize it and doing it skillfully, not half-assed, then there's great benefit that comes from it. I'm a living example of that, because meditation was a central part of my early formative years. When I was in college, I literally spent a minimum of 6 hours a day in meditation. It's why I went to the monastery, honestly, because I wanted more time to do it. And I was hoping that I could make monastic life work for me, so that I could spend most of my time meditating on divine realities and things of that nature. But that was how serious I was. I wasn't looking to just, relax or to take it, to be trivial with it. I was looking at it as a tool for advancement. But I mean, if you're talking about it as far as risk, well, everything's a risk. Why? I mean, you can get into a car. It could take you to the doctor if you're sick. It could take you to a wonderful meal with a friend. It could take you on vacation. Or you can get into a car and it can kill you. All right. I mean, should we not get into a car just because the risk of being killed in a car accident is there? Should you never get on a plane because occasionally one crashes? No, that's stupid. Okay. Meditation's the same thing. Yes, there's inherent risk in every single thing you choose to do. However, risk is not a reason not to do something. Risk is only a means to keep you mindful. Okay, risk is a way of doing things in a sense that allows you to capitalize on your highest wisdom. And meditation is definitely a means of doing that. All right, we're going to take our break here. And when we come back, we are going to be talking about astrology with brand new guest, Jasmine Boodle. Don't go away. Welcome back, everybody, to Vestiges After Dark. We're having trouble actually connecting with the guest tonight. So Brandon is going to continue to try to reach out to her to get us connected. In the meantime, we will continue the show as though it's open lines, open topics. You can ask us any questions, even call into the show. We actually have a new phone number. Skype is being discontinued, so we just went ahead and got rid of it. And so it's the new number is 207-544-1983. That's 207-544-1983. I don't have an international thing. I think you can try still calling Eye of the Seer on whatever Skype became. I guess it's called Teams. We can see if that works if you're international, but that's the number to call if you want to ask a question on the show. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're not having any luck getting in touch with our guest tonight, so we're going to proceed with tonight's show as though it is open lines, open topics. We missed one anyway because of the cancellation during the internet fiasco of this season, so it's not going to be too much of an issue. Brandon, make sure you keep in touch with Brandon. Let me know when he's needing to be unmiked. Right now he's muted and he can't unmute himself. So right. I'll bring him back on when you tell me he's ready. Just tap me or something. In the meantime, I know we had another question from the ether that we can get to when he's back. But are there any questions that any of you have out there in the audience for us this evening? I know we didn't prepare this show to be open lines, open topics, but you always have great questions for us. And we just, as evidenced by the last question, it's great to discuss meditation. I think that unfortunately Protestantism, or I should say it's not so much Protestantism as much as it's evangelical Christianity, has given this mentality of fear, or produce a mentality of fear about meditation, because of course it comes from, at least in their minds, it comes from something that's only done in the East, and they live by a type of Christianity that teaches if it's not of God, it's of the devil, which is absolutely not true.
Well, it also ignores like a massive swathe of Christianity because, I alluded to, so in the chat for T and Trish's benefit, I put a couple of links to Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, the late one of the bishops for England for the Greek Orthodox Church, but an Englishman, scholar, and was a friend of mine, and his passing was a great loss to the church, but but he can't live forever. But he used to give great talks on the Jesus prayer, and really from the position of hesychasm. So Hezekiah, which is this. You mentioned the church fathers, the desert fathers earlier. They were heavily engaged in this. This is this divine quietness. So this isn't just because there's a difference between meditation and inactivity. Right. And Hezekiah is the idea that we have an active silence, that active silence is filled with deepening our love of God, our awareness of God, and our purpose in the world and in the world to come. So it's a deeply Christian ancient tradition to be in this. You could use the word meditative state, contemplating the divine beauty of God. The highest form of worship is adoration.
Well, it actually is the foundation.
It's been neglected in the West.
It has been. It's the foundation. Hesychasm is the foundation to theosis. I mean, it's how theosis is ultimately achieved. Honestly, it's at least the starting point from our point. You know, the part that we play in this is largely hesychasm to get started into that. Of course, the divine takes over from there. It's a lot like contemplatio in the West, where once you initiate the meditation, then God, through the Holy Spirit will lead you into contemplatio if you're lucky. It doesn't always happen, but it is something that God decides when and if it does. But meditation's that starting point for it. So there's a lot of different ways, even centering prayer, and unfortunately, centering prayers become somewhat a controversial thing that really shouldn't have been ever controversial. Father Basil Pennington was the one that he actually was at some Christian monasteries in, I believe it was China. He invited me to. I knew him, and Thomas Keating was his companion, I guess you could say, in this work. Both Cistercians, and he invited me when he was still alive. I was just a seminarian back then, to visit him in China and visit the monastery out there, and they were integrating Eastern, mostly Buddhist meditation techniques, but from a completely Christian standpoint. They were just using the techniques, but they were applying a Christian focus to it. So instead of extinguishing or trying to arrive at some kind of nothingness, which is what would be achieved in Buddhism, they were trying to dissolve themselves, using the same techniques, dissolve themselves into Christ, and that's what what centering prayer became, a means of doing.
Along it's the John the Baptist position of I must decrease, he must increase. That's the purpose of that approach, right? It's kenotic. So kenosis is self-emptying, but it's not self-emptying to be empty. Right. to be an empty vessel. It's emptying to allow yourself to be filled by the power of God as well as God's will.
Yes.
The great image of that is from Philippians 2, where Jesus is emptied to the point of death on a cross. That's why he's been highly exalted. Mm-hmm. So it's a real, for him, that it was literally a torturous and murderous process. And that's why we find it difficult, to empty ourselves of our ego, our narcissism. Those two things have got terrible connotations in our day and age. You actually need a healthy ego and a healthy narcissism. But the whole point of the self-emptying is to question whether those things are serving you or you're serving them, to empty them out, to then allow the power of God to, in a sense, correct you. And in a certain way, you do that daily. That's why we have daily prayer. And then, of course, there are crisis points in life, or significant moments in our lives where we need to do that in a really deliberate and hopefully guided way. Yeah. Which is what spiritual direction really is. It's saying, to put it bluntly, what amalgamation of crap have you got in your life that you need to flush out to allow space for something better?
Yeah, I mean, that's true, and it works, and it's perfectly compatible with the Christian. In fact, it's not just compatible with the Christian life. It's, as you just said, more or less, it facilitates the Christian life. It makes it even richer and more successful. One can be more successful in one's journey because it's a struggle. I mean, spirituality is a challenge. At least it should be. It's not all just relaxation and fun and games and feel good nonsense. That's what a lot of people turn it
If you're
into.
not being challenged on the daily, then you're not doing it right.
No, you're not doing it right at all. It should hurt. Actually, spirituality should hurt.
I mean, I've been kind of reflecting on this on cultural issues recently. I mean, in Australia, we've. I was thinking about this a long time before this, but on Anzac Day, which is the day they remember the First World War sacrifice of the Anzac soldiers in Gallipoli, there was a welcome to country done by an Aboriginal person, which has become sort of. I don't want to be harsh because I don't reject it wholeheartedly, but it's become a kind of performative or necessary sort of procedural thing that's done. I think it's lost the essence of what it is. And people booed during the Welcome to Country because it is controversial. We're remembering people who died giving their lives for Australia. And yet it can be, I don't think this is the intention of the Welcome to Country, but it can be you could think that, well, so these people that died for their country, do they need welcoming to their country? But so that's actually not the position of Welcome to Country, but that's what it's turned into.
Yeah.
But there's a deeper problem. I don't really want to talk about the politics of that. The issue is the culture, and for in Australia we have also multiculturalism is into detail and everything apart from white culture, because white people are just seen as a white. And my contention is that, well, actually, a white Australian who traces their ancestry directly back to Britain, maybe 7 generations hence, but they're just as British as I am. Culturally, they're inheritors of that culture. But because we're swimming in that culture, we can't see it. No. But one of the cultures that I think's crept in to Western civilization is. I was at a baptism on Sunday at not my church, at a different church, and people just cannot sit still. Just going back to what we were talking about, they cannot. I'm not talking about children. That's fine. Children can do what they want, right? As long as they're there, I don't care. But I'm talking about adults, grown-ups, and at least 3 different generations. They literally cannot sit still and listen. It's like. Cultural ADHD everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think
I think that's cell phones. Honestly, I think it's cell phones largely.
Oh, absolutely. It's the internet. It's a really crappy
TikTok
education
culture
system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can Google it. So you don't need to know anything. By the way, not true. Fact check, not true. How can you think if you don't know anything? But anyway, but I think that. What I do know, I don't know all the answers to all the problems in the universe, but here's the one thing I do know. If we can't sit still and we fill our lives with activity and distractions, we cannot develop. That's one thing I do know.
Yeah.
And so therefore, for me, that's a far bigger problem than if somebody's meditating and you're not quite sure where that's going to lead. Like, I think, I said this in the chat to Trish, good mum, you've got a young man that actually wants to sit in meditation.
Wants to actually approve himself. Yeah.
You're a hero.
Yeah. I mean, it's a rare thing. It is. It's a rare thing because most people don't have that as the motivation in their lives. And, he recognizes I would recognize in that, that he himself recognizes that he wants to discover more, that he knows that there's something, beyond what he currently understands and wants to experience.
And actually, just to extend it out, this is a bit of a phenomenon for everyone's benefit.
Yeah.
Because my son is 17, and without any encouragement or assistance from me, began praying the rosary.
There you go.
Now, those are 2 anecdotes, Trish's son and my son. But it's part of a wider movement of young men, and it is young males across the world, which is a new thing, because in my generation it was girls that went to church, and then I followed them because I fancied them, and I ended up a Christian, right? So, that was my entry to the church. Worked. Yeah, indeed. And so God uses all things for good. But this generation, it's young men, and I'm coming to because Danielle's asked a question in the chat as well. I'm coming to this. So across the world, young men are being drawn to the church. Now, in my generation, it was kind of Baptist churches and charismatic evangelical churches through females getting you into the church to a pop concert, right? That sounds more dismissive than I want it to. I'm not putting it down, okay? But the great thing, in my opinion, about this generation of young males that are coming to the church is they're going to the most traditional Anglican churches. There are still some left, believe it or not. You call them Episcopal churches in America, but yours might be too far gone. But anyway, the most traditional Anglican churches, traditional Catholicism, and Orthodoxy. So we've got young men being drawn to, for ease of communication, high church worship. You know, bells, smells, difficulty, complication, high theology, all the rest of it. That's a phenomenon. Yeah. And I suspect, Trish, that your son's on that same pathway, and it may well be that the Holy Spirit is at work, that this period we've had of hyperactivity and over stimulation from phones and from everything else, maybe the response is that young people, especially males, are turning away from that and seeing the appeal of much more contemplative worship, because that's what traditional churches do: incense, vestments, altars, even in an aesthetic sense. I'm not saying that they've got some deep spiritual theological awakening, but that's a good path to be on. So Danielle's question was, I was asked recently how to define traditional Catholicism. Everyone seems to have different answers. What are your thoughts, Bishop? Well, bishops. I'm not a bishop. Just for the record, I'm not a bishop. My spine's intact.
Yeah, and you don't have to wear those blasted miters. I would define traditional Catholicism as more of the flavors of pre-Vatican II is, I think, what most people kind of refer to it as when they say that. I mean, of course, that's a bit of a generalization, but overall, they're talking about the Latin Mass. They're talking about back in the days where, women, wore veils and people got really dressed up. They didn't go to church in jeans and t-shirts and sneakers. It was. But then again, you got to understand culturally this changed too. I mean, people lament about casinos the same way. They're like, remember those days where people went to Las Vegas casinos, everyone got dressed up, and no one does anymore. They look like slobs. It's like, well, yeah, that's a cultural shift, and in church, followed suit. But a lot of people did not like the changes to the Mass, and rightfully so. Now, I defend it, and because we use it. It is our liturgy in the Nicolean Catholic Church. Predominantly, our liturgy is the liturgy that developed out of the Second Vatican Council. It's what I grew up on. It's what I'm the most familiar with. It was what I was trained with in seminary. So, and it was profoundly efficacious for me. So I maintained it on that basis. But that's not to say that I don't recognize the abuses that happen. Like when this is not a lie. We were told this in seminary by a priest who lived it. When Vatican II happened and they loosened up some of the rules, there were hippie priests coming straight out of the 60s that thought that this was a field day, that now they could do whatever the hell they wanted. And, there are rules even now, even under Vatican II, and that didn't change, that there's certain things in the sacraments that require validity. You have to, in terms of the Eucharist, use the correct substance. So it has to be, the host has to be made of just wheat and water. That's it. Okay. And you have to use wine, fermented grape. It can't be anything else.
Double fermented.
Right. Exactly. Now in a emergency situation, you could make a simple wine with raisins in water and leaving it in the earth for a couple of days for it to ferment. You could, and that would be still considered valid, not preferable, but like in certain emergency situations, things like that have happened. But these are absolute rules for validity. You're not receiving the Eucharist if you're not doing it using these correct substances. But under when Vatican II happened, some of these hippie priests, they decided to try doing the Eucharist with Doritos and Pepsi, and they really did. It's not valid, okay, but they were doing it. So when people talk about traditional Catholicism, they're kind of reacting to all of the multiple abuses that occurred after the fact. Like, there's a rule. If you've ever noticed in old churches, the choir and the pipe organ are always behind the congregation, always in the back of the church, right? There's a reason for that. Because it's not a performance. All right. You're not, even though the music is usually very beautiful in some of these parishes, particularly if they have a really good director and, you have very talented people. I belong to a church back in my Roman Catholic days that was very much could have been performance level, but you're not supposed to be watching them. It's supposed to be eyes fixed on Christ. So all of that happens behind in a traditional mass. That's the way it's done. But in Vatican II, let's have a little hoedown next to the altar. So they all gather around with their guitars and their drums.
Even though it never said that in any of the documents.
Exactly. Never said to do that. No, they just took liberties. No. They took liberties. Yeah. And they assumed things. But drums are particularly problematic. Drums are not supposed to be used during
Let's
a mass.
see, Bishop, right there, you just forgot the 2 flat screen, like 50 to 60 inch TVs that display the lyrics to the music. You forgot to add that.
That shouldn't be happening either. I don't know. I've never seen that abuse in a Catholic church, but I wouldn't say it's not out there. Have you really? I have not even seen that. I have not seen that.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
That's crazy. But I know it's out there. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. So traditional is really getting back to more of those values. Like there was a time where you could not receive, even in the Orthodox Church, it's still this way. You could not receive the host in your hands. You had to kneel at the communion rail and receive by mouth. In the Orthodox Church, it's still done by this way. Part of it's because they use an intinction, so it would not be appropriate for you to handle bread that's been dipped in wine. But even
they also
outside,
don't allow any instruments in the Orthodox Church.
That's right. They don't.
Only the
human voice. That's right. Because they never had Vatican II, so they weren't as corrupted by it. And you can see how it maintained itself better in that way. Even the Eastern Catholic churches have maintained a better form, I would say, than a lot of the churches. But it's getting better. Pope Benedict helped a lot. He kind of got he brought some of the words back, the original Latin meanings back into the English translations. I'm a vernacular guy. I think that the Mass should be in the vernacular. So I am not a pro-Latin Mass person.
I'm either. I mean, look, the issue for me, though, isn't whether it's in Latin or the vernacular. I think I'm happy with both, by the way.
Oh, it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong. It's beautiful. Yeah. And I'm not going to say it's invalid to do it one way or the other. But I do feel that we're not...
The Novus Ordo is written in Latin. So you can celebrate the new Mass in Latin. That would annoy everybody.
You would. You absolutely could. You could. But my feeling on it is, that we... and this is a very Orthodox thing. This is a very Eastern Church thing. We're not as much as I wish we were. We are not a church of scholars. Okay, there's scholarship within it, but most people in the Catholic Church do not speak Latin. There are, and so you're not going to get the same understanding out of it. And what Vatican II did emphasize, and rightfully so, the full participation of the laity in it. The problem with the traditional Mass was that it always felt like the priest was up there taking care of everything, and all you had to do is sit there because that's all you were allowed to do. That's all you're good for. And I know my grandparents, had that mentality. is that they were not really participating in anything. They did not see themselves as offering the Mass. When I had a conversation with my grandmother before she died about that, when I was a seminary, and I would go over and visit sometimes, and she'd talk about church was very important to her. And, I talked to her about, well, you're by being a participant in the Mass, you're offering the Mass. Because she didn't like the fact that her church, that when she moved to Boca Raton, Florida, she didn't like the fact that her church was, the altar was in the center and all of the seating was around it. And
church in the round.
Yeah, a church in the round. And I said, well, I don't like those terribly much either, but the thinking behind it is that you're all participating you're all offering the Mass together. It's not just the priest. She could not wrap her head around that because she grew up in pre-Vatican II times where that was not the image. It might have been what was ultimately happening, but people did not understand that that's what they were there to do. And that's, I think, something that Vatican II did very well, is to bring the laity into their active roles, because we all belong to the priesthood of all believers. And under Vatican, before Vatican II, there wasn't a whole lot you could do as a lay person except show up.
Yeah,
I think I'm kind of a both and sort of a guy, and I mean, look, because I was in the Church of England and in the Anglo-Catholic wing of that, we either use the English Missal, which is the old Mass, but in English. So one of my contentions is they should have authorized the 60, well, I mean, it wasn't even the 60, it was pre-62, but let's say the 1962 Missal. They should have authorized that into English as well as the Novus Ordo. Mm-hmm. So you could do either in English or in Latin. Because I'm not obsessed with Latin, don't get me wrong. It's not like I think it's the magic incantational words that only work in Latin. But here's one.
Some people do. Some people think that.
I know that, and they're wrong, and that's why they ruin it for everybody. Pope Francis clamps down on the old Mass in Latin because some people are stupid. I think that was a bad tactic, by the way. You should deal with the stupid people, not collective punishment. But leaving that aside, you can in fact celebrate the Novus Ordo very beautifully. It was always the joke, if you want to see the Mass of Paul VI celebrated beautifully, go to the Church of England, because they weren't restricted in a sense by, they didn't have to eradicate all the old practices. And also, when you've got a church that's 1,000 years old, you can't just pull the altar away from the wall. Like it's a scheduled ancient monument. You're not allowed to do that. Right. And so you can celebrate the new Mass facing the altar. And I think one of the things to beware, there's a group of people whose appeal to the traditional Latin Mass is actually not an appeal to the traditional Latin Mass. It's an appeal to a certain mentality that was really unhealthy in the life of the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that has to be held in tension. We actually don't want to wind back the clock to 1930 because the Church's theology is actually deeper now than it was then.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and yet their illusion is that somehow it's shallower now, so we've got to go back there. And so I understand what. Here's my main argument for the Latin Mass. I don't buy the argument that nobody understood what was going on in the Mass. When Latin was the only language, I mean, you had missals that
translated it for you. You could do the work.
But also, it's only because the Church of England under Henry VIII, well, we still have the Latin Mass under Henry VIII, the Church of England eventually brought in a vernacular liturgy that was quite different, actually. But that we all of a sudden were worshipping in English. Before that, if you've been baptized, grown up, gone to Mass every Sunday and holy day of obligation all your life, you do know what's going on in the Mass. I'm sorry, you do. We don't now because we've lost it. Yeah. But the other benefit for the Latin Mass, whether it's the Mass of Paul VI or the 62 Missal, the other benefit is like where I live here, at my parish church here, there are Filipinos, there are Indians, there are English, French, Spanish, Italian, Greek speakers. Mm-hmm. All are there. So we're using the vernacular in our Mass. What we mean by that is we're using English. Mm-hmm. It's not the vernacular language of the Filipinos and the Greeks and the Italians and the Spaniards.
Right, yeah.
So And then I think, if I remember correctly, in Los Angeles or San Francisco, one or the other, the Catholic Church there, the bishop, they used to have about 7 masses on a Sunday, one in Polish, one in Spanish, one in English, one, they had all these, and he said, we're not doing this anymore. It's ridiculous. We're going to have it one in English and one in Latin. And that's where Latin, in a sense, can become a unifying language. The Orthodox Church overwhelmingly do not celebrate in the vernacular. I know the OCA do in America, but in the rest of the English-speaking world, Greeks are celebrating in Kini Greek, not even modern Greek, Kini, ancient Greek. The Serbs, the Russians are celebrating in Old Church Slavonic, which is not Russian or Serbian. So in other words, all these other churches have managed to gather around a common language that's unchanging. So that's my defense of the Latin Mass, without saying vernacular liturgies. They are important vernacular liturgies. I'm not opposed to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. I mean, you have to. I think go with what speaks to you. I mean, there is something to be said for that, and certainly the Tridentine Mass speaks to some people. I mean, and I understand why. I mean, it is definitely more profound, more deliberate, slower. Than less utilitarian, I guess you could say, than what we have now. But at the same time, I can tell you it would be very cumbersome to try to do that with
it'd be beautiful.
Yeah, but, I mean, you guys wouldn't be allowed at the altar, for one thing,
right?
So
have fun, hell, all that.
I mean, so there's benefits to it.
But that was actually missed by a lot of, I mean, especially by the ones that love the 62. By the way, they talk about the 1962 Missal as though it's ancient, like that. I mean, there'd been how many reforms from Trent by the time the 62 Missal was issued? Anyway, but leaving that aside, they really don't know as much about liturgy as they think they do.
Well, it's the wisdom, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, sorry. But when Pope Benedict broadened out the ability of any priest to celebrate the 62 Missal if they wish to, it did not change. And it was specifically said that basically what's in the germ about who can serve at the altar is valid for that. So even though some chose to interpret it differently, they were wrong. You can, for the first time ever, you can celebrate the 62 Latin Mass with women as altar servers.
Yes,
That got missed.
Under Benedict, but you wouldn't have been able to do that in the you wouldn't have been able to do that in the 50s.
No. Yeah. And the Orthodox still don't let you.
They still don't. You can't even go behind the iconostas unless you're a nun. Nuns can go behind the iconostas if there's a reason to do so. If there's a reason to do so, but lay women cannot. They sometimes taunt the priests with it. It was very, really kind of funny.
I would be a taunter.
We had one. She would help with. She would get like the vestments cleaned and everything and else. She would go into the door because the sanctuary has back doors in most churches where the priest can come in through the back instead of always going through the iconostasis.
So they can go out for a cigarette during the
Sometimes, yeah. Because I mean, let's face it. When they say let's complete our prayers to the Lord, there's at least another hour and a half to go. I mean, so so she would open that door while he was back there, preparing and she'd stick her foot through and not touch ground. She'd be like, "Look, Father, I'm coming in. I'm coming in.
I'm gonna do
it." As long as you don't step on it, you're okay. It was really kind of funny. Okay, so we got a question from Lisa Williams, a bit of a change of gear here on the paranormal question.
The elemental, yeah.
She says, I have a paranormal question. What are your thoughts on elementals? For our purposes in this particular ministry, I used my 4 designation model that pretty much covers all of the possibilities outside of malingering. I guess you could say is a 5th possibility. But I mean, as far as like genuine paranormal events are going to fall into, at least disturbing ones, are going to fall into 4 categories: demonic, elemental, thought form, or wrathful spirit. Okay. Elementals are that 2nd category. How I define them, and I think most people that have done this work long enough would agree with me, I define them as a primordial spirit, something that is very ancient, that has been here.
Natural.
Yes, yes, and been part of creation longer than we have. So you're talking about a very again primordial energy that has varying degrees of sentience. However you want to define that, which could be a whole other question. And there's varying degrees, just like they're all, I would say elementals are all incorporeal. They can affect the corporeal world. They are incorporeal by nature. Okay. And there are varying degrees, just like in the animal kingdom that we have here in the physical world. Elementals have that same variation. So you could have something as sophisticated as or as intelligent as a whale, or a primate or a cat. These are higher. They have prefrontal cortex. They can actually do some, basic reasoning. Or you can have mosquitoes, which have no reasoning, right? You can have insects, right? The animal kingdom is vast and wide, and varying degrees of ability exist there. And the same thing occurs with elementals. Now, if you're dealing with a high level elemental, something that is extremely sentient, like a djinn, exactly, that would be more akin to a primate or a whale, something more sophisticated in the animal kingdom. Then you have to deal with that very differently than, let's say, a lower level elemental, which might not even have a name. You might call them gremlins. I do.
Gremlins, imps.
Yeah, imps. These are not necessarily. They behave more instinctively, and it's more like a rodent or a lizard, or to use a comparison. And you deal with those very differently than the higher form. So the importance of understanding what an elemental is, or at least which kind of elemental you're dealing with, is only to help you better tailor a solution to whatever the problem is. The problem is also, just like in the animal kingdom, higher level ones are more rare. Lower level ones are more prolific, right? I mean, I can tell you right now, mosquitoes outnumber primates. I can't tell you how many to one, but I know that it's a big number, okay? There's far more of them than higher animals, okay? And even though we are all fruitful, they're far more fruitful than we are. They can reproduce much faster. And so in the same sense, elementals kind of follow a very similar pattern in this way. So infestations, elemental infestations, can absolutely produce an environment that is so toxic that it is usually, in these kinds of cases, better to just find another home than it would be to try to continue to live there and resolve it, because you're talking about, sometimes infestations can become almost irreconcilable, and it's just easier to just leave. But as far as what they are, you're talking about a spiritual, incorporeal being that is part of creation. So they're not outside of creation. They're not better than you. They're still a created being, just not corporeal. Okay. And they have been here longer. Okay. So what creates a problem is we, as human beings, tend to destroy natural environments and build things on them. And that can sometimes intersect with a space that they have already claimed and have claimed for perhaps thousands of years, which creates a disturbance. Okay. And it's sometimes just an energetic disturbance, like knocking down a tree that has a beehive that now they all come after you. It's like that kind of thing. Okay. You're interfering with their home, and there's an instinctive response to that has spiritual consequences.
Kind of like I'm going to react if you show up in my driveway with a bulldozer.
Exactly. I mean, how would you feel about that, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're dealing with. So this is what we see a lot. Elemental issues are perhaps, I would say, the hardest ones to resolve.
I have dealings with them on my property.
They're here.
I've been trying for 2.5 years to make peace with what's on my property.
Sometimes you can't.
The people that lived there before me obviously did not take care of it.
Right.
And I've been trying to settle things since I moved in. And it has gotten better.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Sometimes you can't. If you're dealing with something that is so low level that there is no common frame of reference, there's nothing that you can really do except perhaps try to elevate the energy, which forces them out. But that can be very difficult to do. And sometimes you can so radically affect the energy that it actually makes it worse. I think that at least on this property, having mass here has absolutely made things worse. Because
high vibration.
it's a too high a
versus the low
vibration, and
yeah.
this is just too low. And it's very hard to find a vibration that can sort of make peace.
Middle ground.
It is. So I have to create more barriers than anything else. But I know that there's toxic energy all around, and it's all elemental. And there's only so much, even as an exorcist, I can do. I mean, there's things I could do. I haven't spent the time that it takes to do that because it is very time consuming. However, it's an interesting part of the dynamic because demons, they follow the rules. There's a process to working with demons, and
they're intelligent. That's why.
Well, that's it. Yes, and it almost, I would say, I dare say, almost like a code of like rules of engagement.
Well, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And they respect those
have to
rules.
adhere
They're bound by them.
They're bound by them.
They have to adhere to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes it a little bit easier to work with. Elementals, it's like trying to explain calculus to a mosquito. They're not going to get it. They're not going to understand. You can't do it. It's not going to work. So you got to come up with other solutions. And, each category of the 4 types of demons has their own difficulties, their own challenges. I would say the easiest one to deal with is the wrathful spirit, because that's literally just an unrested person that needs to find their way home. And that's usually the easiest thing we can do. The powers, the church is literally designed for that. So they respond very well to the effects of the church. Thought forms can be, it depends. It depends
on if it's something created from the person's trauma. They're gonna have to face that trauma.
Yeah.
And heal themselves.
Yeah.
In order for it to stick.
I mean, that's the thing, is that what do you do when you're dependent with a thought form completely upon the skillfulness or lack thereof of the victim? How do you work with? You got to work with the victim, but then now you're bound by how sophisticated their own spirituality is and how severe is their trauma. So that's the hardest part of, I think, the work that it is. But that's how I would define an elemental. Is there anything you'd add to that? Because we've dealt with them quite often.
Quite often. The only thing, my worst case with you was the case where it was a jinn, and the client ended up dying.
Yeah.
Because he kept getting in trouble, and we didn't have access to him. And it was partially influenced by what he was being oppressed by.
Right.
Lisa just asked a question in the chat that I think can segue into this. She goes, how do you determine if you're dealing with an elemental? Well, it depends on what you get during the investigation. That's what you have equipment for. And if the prayers of the church, the prayers of the church don't seem to be working.
Well, I mean, that's
if you
not
get crazy activity going on that you can't.
I mean, it's kind of like
narrow down to.
It's kind of like asking an ontology. I mean, it's like asking a doctor, a surgeon, how do you determine it's this type of cancer versus that type of cancer?
You got to investigate it.
I mean,
you got to narrow it down.
It's a process of investigation. It's
And
a lot of
elimination.
skill.
Yeah.
It's a lot of experience. And it's working with these things over the course of several years, which is why, I mean, the only way that anyone can really ever become an exorcist, right? The only way is through a lifelong mentorship, really. And what I mean by lifelong is that an exorcist takes you under their wing, and you're basically their student until the day they die. Yeah. Even when you might rise to the occasion of being in that position, you're still ultimately learning from that person.
That's going to be a constant thing because, like you said, elementals don't have the rules of engagement that the other spirits and entities would have.
Yeah.
So, you do this work long enough, there's a pattern that develops.
Right.
Well, anything that doesn't fit the pattern could be elemental, and then you got to do the process of elimination with that. So it does take a lot of time to determine what it is, and even if you do determine what it is, it may not be something that's solvable. One thing that cracks me up, I know all of our fans love the Dead Files too, and there's several episodes where Amy Allen will come in and basically she'll be like, things are here that don't want you here, and you're screwed, you're going to need to move. And
sometimes that is the answer.
Yeah, sometimes.
Because it's like, again, to use a corporeal example, you live you might buy a house that's infested with termites. It could be so bad.
Yeah, how long are you going to stay?
It could be so far gone that you really just literally have to tear it down and start again before you could ever make it, habitable again. So that's kind of what this is, but no, it's an experiential thing. There's so many variables at work with trying to diagnose the very specifics that I think really the only way to truly answer the question is years of experience.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Experience
it's years. There's
help.
there's no formula I can say, here's how you do it. It comes with experience. You just, as you do this work,
experience, gut feeling.
Yeah. It takes years. It takes years to be able to make that kind of determination and get it right. It does. And that just comes with time and a lot of it, decades.
And being open. I remember we had one case in Clayton County. You remember the one where we went to the backyard and both you and I started getting numb from my feet up to my waist, and yours was your heart. It's kind of personal encounters too.
Yeah.
Feeling certain kinds of energy, which you get more sensitive the longer you do this job. So
and that helps actually.
Sometimes the personal reaction to a phenomenon may tell you, okay, this is probably going to be elemental.
Yeah. Mystic asks another question here. I would love to learn Aramaic and at some point Latin. Could you advise me on a good way to go about it? Sometimes when studying religious texts, I come across them and I want to understand. I mean, that's you'd have to go into university for that. You'd have to go to a university that has a language department with a professor that deals specifically with dead languages.
Yeah, the Aramac's really going to be hard.
Yeah, I mean,
you could go to an Assyrian Church of the East. The Assyrian Church of the East worship in Aramaic, and so at least if you went to and they are all over the place, especially in England where Danielle is, wouldn't be hard to get in touch with somebody because they could.
But would they have somebody that would teach her how to do it?
Well, maybe not, but because they worship in Aramaic, they would be a good source of the people that can teach.
They could show you someone.
They would know.
Connect you to someone that would know. Yeah, I mean, mostly that's going to be for the average person. It's going to be signing up with a university that has a dead language program, and only the real particular universities are going to have that. I mean,
Latin's easier, of course.
So Latin would be easier, yeah. Aramaic, yeah.
But I think for Danielle's benefit, because obviously I know England because I'm from there, to make the distinction between what we're talking about in the Latin Mass is ecclesiastical Latin, which is a different pronunciation and is a more restricted vocabulary on purpose because it means that the words can't change their meaning. Dominus can only mean the Lord Jesus Christ, and then there's classical Latin, which is you're more likely to be able to find someone that will teach you that. they're the same language. It's just different pronunciation. So I would recommend to, and then there's English derivative Latin, which is how we pronounce Latin in an anglicized Welsh. So we say Caesar, for example, which is an anglicization. A classical Latinist would say Kaiser, and in the church we'd say Caesar. So, but for Danielle's benefit, it wouldn't be hard for you to find somebody that would teach you classical Latin. It's taught in a lot of schools in England still. Yeah. In fact, it's taught in more schools than ever because the last government brought it back in high schools. So I think you could find that fairly easily. And YouTube is replete with people that can give you a primer on Latin.
I think there might even be programs for Latin. I don't know about Aramaic.
I think there are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take our next break. Hold your thoughts there, Brandon. We're going to take our next break here, and when we come back, we'll take more of your questions about whatever might be on your mind. Don't go away.
Picking up the parts of all my life, didn't get to solve it this time. How am I to break apart? Don't tell me why we can't collide. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Don't you feel it? On the break of dawn, I'll follow you to carry on. On the break of dawn, follow you to carry on. I was seeing father in dark sky, bringing with the fire, not for kind. Follow my heart tonight. Show you how I play my part. Ghosts in the night don't justify the love we lost, the love we hide. Don't you feel it? Don't you feel it? On the break of dawn, I follow you to carry on. On the break of dawn, I'll follow you to carry on.
We keep running faster and faster. I don't know where we're after, yeah. We keep up with desire. keep running faster and faster. I don't know what we're after, yeah. We keep up with disaster. I'm thinking that they're after me. We're running like faster and faster. We're running like faster and faster.
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final hour of Vestiges After Dark. We were originally going to be talking about astrology tonight, but we could not connect with the guest that we had scheduled for this date. So this is now the open lines, open topics that we never got because internet issues earlier in the season. We had to cancel one of our open lines dates, and so you got one anyway. So here you go. When we come back here, we will take more of your questions. You can also call into the show using our brand new phone number, 207-544-1983. That's 207-544-1983. You can also ask your questions in the various chat rooms. Our moderators are looking across the internet, whether you be on Facebook or Twitch or Instagram, and I'm checking too. So if you got a question, just put it into the chat or call. We'd prefer you'd call, but I know a lot of you rather just chat. And that's fine. We'll take them as they come in. Don't go away. I know that there was one question from the ether that we did not get to, Brendan. If you want to go ahead and ask that now, we can at least knock that one off the list while other ones come in.
The ether, yeah. I got a little confused.
The other ether.
The other ether.
All right. So, is there a connection between Jesus' temptation described in Matthew to Buddha's temptation by Mara in the Magavaga, or is this an example of actual truths that religions hold?
Well, I don't think there's no historical connection between the two. You're talking about a 500-year difference, and two different continents, two very different cultures. So there's no historical connection there. It's not like the story started somewhere and made its way across the world, and other people started adopting it. However, that being said, we are dealing with archetypes in these things, and the archetypes do get into everybody's head, and they do, and in fact, permeate through all culture, all religion. So this is another example of the hero's descent into the underworld and the hero's triumph over the forces of darkness that he finds there. Okay. It's a universal archetypal truth. Our best stories are written about these very things. I mean, Star Wars is that. Harry Potter is that. Lord of the Rings is that. I mean, pick some of our best stories, and the reason why they are so loved, even though it's basically a retelling of the same archetypal story. It's done, cleverly enough, artistically enough, differently enough that it still feels fresh and new. And this is that. However, when you're talking about something like Jesus or Buddha, you're talking about the very incarnation of these things. Okay, so Jesus in particular isn't just, man, God becoming man. But it's God becoming a perfect man. And the perfect hero is represented in the archetype. Of course, the archetypes are always going to show you the most perfect example of what that is. Nobody could possibly live up to, the archetypes that these people represent. Even the characters themselves don't. Look at Dumbledore. He's an extremely flawed character. Right? Extremely flawed. There's not far from perfect. However, he still embodies that. Harry Potter too. He's I mean, kind of almost a terrible hero, but he the hero lives through him, and he manifests it the best that he can.
Thank God for Hermione.
I know Hermione, right? Out. Yeah, helped him out. Luke Skywalker also flawed, and they made him very flawed when Disney took over.
Don't.
No,
so
that never happened.
I'm still angry about that.
I know. But this goes to show you, that Jesus is now the epitome, the perfection of the archetype, not just a representation of it, but the perfect fulfillment of it. Because all humanity is basically living out these archetypes. He had, if he's going to come and be among us, he's going to have to integrate those archetypes too. He's going to do them in a perfect way, and that's what's represented there. So you're going to see parallels because the archetypes love to maintain the synchronicity of their existence. So those parallels are going to be found within the variations, but there's no historical connection between them. They are completely independent tellings. And I would say that, Buddha's, defeat of Mara is absolutely an internal process entirely. This is not a vision he had. This was not some kind of a mystical event that took place in time. This was an allegory for the challenge that we have to attain to enlightenment and the obstacles that prevent that from happening. It was a way of trying to express that in much the same way that the Garden of Eden story tries to express through allegory how evil came into the world. These are not historical events, but they are indicative of something greater, something truer, something more profound, more transcendent, and therefore more real. But yeah, that's I don't know, Father. Any thoughts you have on Mara's the hero's descent, and how, I guess,
not really. I mean, like, I think you're right. These are well, it just goes back to Genesis. We're made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore archetypical stories are going to be generated no matter what period of time and space we're in. And in a way, this is, if you look at the unique character of Jesus Christ, is that he's foreannounced, like he's pre-announced by multiple events, not only before his birth, but actually you can look back in your own life and think, actually, he's been pre-announced in my own life.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Going back to what I said much earlier in the show about, if we actually understood all of the scientific truths of our reality, all of it would have the same effect. It would still, it would point to the Christ moment, because that's the center point of the whole of creation.
Yes.
Or the whole of creation that God has made for human beings anyway.
Well said. Well said.
So I guess with the question, the more not historically related part, but the fact that Buddha was tempted 3 times, like with the number 3, and then in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, Jesus is also tempted 3 times. So I think that was the kind of the question of that kind of connection, being tempted 3 times.
I mean, I think that's an archetypal parallel.
Okay.
I again, I think we tend to think, I think the number 3 is a very significant number for understanding our linear place, because we are sort of conditioned by past, present, and future. And so when we tell a story, we tend to always, I guess, qualify it by having 3 primary examples. Like every story has a rising action, a climax, and a falling action.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an example of that, is that it has to have sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's always going to be 3 components. And so I think to have the satisfaction of a cohesive story, that element of 3 events must take place in order for it to be fully realized. What I think it is. I think that's just more of a human condition because of our linear predicament of having to see things through the lens of 3 stages of time, because everything is based as relative to that. Everything is based upon that. Every thought you have has to be either about something that occurred a long time ago, something that you're having to deal with now, or projecting something that you're going to have to deal with later. There's nothing else. You can't conceive of any kind of action that does not exist within one of those 3 categories.
It's like any literary work, especially fiction. You have the introduction, the body, and the conclusion.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's basically just a continuation of that phenomenon, which is not terribly mystical. It's just sort of how our brains work. And so I think in the telling of the story, whether or not Jesus was actually tempted 3 times is probably irrelevant. What is, I think, important here is that in order to emphasize the elements of that event, the author, the gospel writer, decided to emphasize it in that way to so that it can best connect with the reader. And I believe it does.
Well, and also, to nitpick a little bit, and I know I've said it before, Jesus was not tempted. The devil dared to attempt to tempt Jesus.
Yeah.
But Jesus was not tempted.
The temptation.
He had the gall to try it.
Yeah, if you're going to be
I am nitpicking, I know.
Because theologically,
I'm drawing a distinction.
It is referred to as the temptation of the desert.
Of course it is.
But it's not really Jesus' temptation. You're right.
No,
It's the devil's attempt to do so. Yes. So it's really, when they talk about Jesus, the temptation in the desert's really the failure of the devil to achieve this, because it didn't work. Obviously, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It's probably a misnomer. It's probably not the best.
Well, I know the
Orthodox.
The Orthodox are very strong on that.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard many Orthodox bishops preach on it. They go,
they
no,
bitch
the
about it.
devil
Yeah.
Dared.
Yeah.
Had the narcissism to, you know.
No, you're right.
Like
You're
that.
right. Yeah. It would be probably best to change the name of that, but it is referred to the temptation in the desert. But I guess it's how you look at it, right? It's how you look at it. It's the devil attempting it. All right, so we got a question from April. All right,
Yep.
What is it there?
Would this be similar to history repeating itself? Going back to the last question.
Oh, the last question about 3, about those.
The similarities.
I mean, it's how history repeats itself. I don't know if it's an example of it, but it's how it happens. Is that, you know, I think we tend to think of ourselves as unique and different from everything else, and we're not. It's like when Scripture says that there's nothing new under the sun, it means it. We're not that terribly different from our ancient ancestors. We're really not. When you read the Gospels, the reason they still speak to us today
They had the same problems
because they had the
back
same
then.
problems.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pharisees are the same problems we deal with in church today. You know, you get these people that follow the law, the letter of the law, but they don't live it. So they're hypocrites. I mean, who hasn't been to a church that hasn't experienced that? I mean, it's the same problem. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just, this was 2,000 years. Nothing's changed. People still act with religiosity instead of genuine, interest in furthering the well-being of everyone else, and facilitating their relationship to God. As well as their own. This is just, I think why history repeats itself is because there's only really one mistake that's ever been made, which is to disobey God, and therefore you just get into a perpetual repeating pattern after that. It's just the same shit, different day phenomenon is what I call it. And it's the fall.
Well, it's also the limits of human imagination as well. I mean, we can only interpret events through the lens of the human experience.
Yeah, what we know.
So those restrictions would apply, which is why we see. Well, it's literally how we interpret the universe. Through patterns. So we see patterns in everything, and more than ever in stories. Words are a pattern. I mean, think about this. This always blows my mind, especially in a culture where we're so used to things being centrally planned and top-down government and all that sort of thing. The language we're speaking now, I'm speaking it in Australia, you're speaking it in Georgia, in America. We know that our listeners are all over the world, but we're able to communicate in these words, which are in fact signs, because all words are signs. Read City of God, St. Augustine, if you want to know more about that. I won't bore you now. But nobody ever designed the English language. There's no central planning organization that decides what's English and what's not. Mm-hmm. It's done by patterning, by call and response.
And it happens organically.
It happens, and yet it develops into something that's way more sophisticated than any government program. It's the ultimate libertarian argument, by the way. The very fundamental basis on which we communicate was something that was not centrally planned. This is not my argument. Just, I hate taking credit for other people's work. Friedrich Hayek said this.
I mean, that's evidenced by, just go back and there's some wonderful linguists, actually scholarly academic linguists on YouTube that talk about this kind of thing, and they'll read like medieval English. You can't understand it. I mean, it's practically incomprehensible.
That's why Shakespeare is so important, because it's really the first era of modern English.
And
we can't understand Shakespeare.
And even that's hard to understand for most people, right? I mean, But it's
yeah, you have to get an ear for it, but it is decipherable. Whereas, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is much more difficult, for modern English, speakers to understand.
Yeah,
much more.
It's true. Much
more Saxon.
It evolves, but I mean, we're limited. All this to say, we're limited by the human story, we're limited by the human experience, and we're limited by the fallen world, and the nature that follows. So therefore, all we can do is keep repeating the same mistakes, because that's the insanity of disobeying God. I mean, it's a type of insanity, really, right? Doing the same thing, expecting different results. Again, they say, and that's what that's what we constantly do. It's what we constantly do. I look at all the problems in the world today, and they're all the same problems that existed 100 years ago. Just different variations of it, and you can do little things to make things better, but in the end, the same ultimate problems that evolve out of the various entropy that we deal with, the various forms of entropy that we deal with, will always prevail. Even the best systems will eventually fail as a result of it. There's a futility to the fallen world. It's self-destructive. So even the best things that we can create within it cannot supersede the demise that is inevitable. And that's why religion's important. That's why church is important. That's why the resurrection's important, because that is the only solution, the only thing that gets you out of it. It's the only thing, right? Is the method to, and what is the secret? The secret is to literally be absorbed by the very thing you are attempting to defeat. You want to die, you want to defeat death, well then die. That's how you do it. With grace, of course. Otherwise it would be futile there too. But even so, that's how it's done. That's why we still do it. I know one question that came in years ago when I would talk about that the cross has already defeated death. That like, well, then why are we still dying? They would ask, and the answer to that is just what I said. It's like, well, because now death is the means through which we achieve immortality. If we brought death into the world, we need to take death out of it, and we do that individually. Not collectively at one time, and definitely not God doing it for us. God giving us the tools to do it for ourselves, because we all contain the individual seed of that thing. We call it sin, and we think of sin as like wrongdoing, but that's again sort of like treating symptoms instead of the disease. Equating sin to wrongdoing is really missing the point. What sin ultimately is, okay, is the absorption, the indulgence of futility. That's what sin is. It's indulging in futility. And only when you finally realize that there is the only way you can get out of that pattern is the only way you can defeat it is to give it all up. Literally empty oneself. And that's where Buddha and Jesus really have the same method. They might describe it differently. It might appear on the surface to have different motivations, but ultimately I think that's why they both work. I really do. And the church, I think, recognizes that now. We were talking earlier, Father, about how, the church is so much more enlightened theologically today than it was even back then, and that's an example of it, because the church of the 1930s would have never been able to say that somebody who wasn't a Catholic, in fact, not let alone a Christian, a Catholic could attain to the kingdom of heaven. It was not possible.
There was actually a shift by Pius XII's time. There was a shift to, even Pius XII was still, asserting clearly the primacy of the Catholic Church, but you get this, and then you get a further shift in Lumen Gentium of the Second Vatican Council, where you get this, instead of the language of where the Catholic Church is, there is Christ, and that's that. You get this shift to, well, what it literally says is the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church, which is a very different statement, because it says, and it's a much more honest statement, and it's a much more truthful statement. It says the Church of Christ cannot be subject and restricted to the Catholic Church. And that's why you get with this, Karl Rahner's Anonymous Christian, which says, actually, God is at work in the lives of all people. We get that through Genesis. And therefore, the job of the church isn't to go around and beat people over the head and say, burn all that crap and here's your Bible.
Right.
It's to say, actually, you're already cooperating with God. God is Jesus Christ. You've been worshipping him anonymously every time you've cooperated with goodness. Let us give you the fullness of that goodness.
Yeah, it's basically just a more
missionary imperative.
Absolutely, and it's more. It helps to emphasize the completeness of it. Like there's ways of doing things, right? Some ways are not the most efficient. Some ways are, you could succeed both ways. Like for example, okay, let's say you want to become a master pianist, all right, and let's say you might not have necessarily the raw talent, but you have the interest. You love the piano. You want to be a master pianist one day. Well, I mean, you could buy one and just start banging around on it and hope that maybe you can figure it out one day. And maybe if you keep doing that, you'll get really good. It could happen.
That's the chimps with a typewriter. Give them long enough to write the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's possible, right? Or you could, train under a master pianist and he can, teach you. One is a much better way to achieve that goal than the other. They're both possibly, and ultimately your heart's in the right place in both directions. You want to play the piano. You want to be good at it. But one way is going to be much more efficient, much more skillful, and will guarantee more success than the other. And this is like that. So, I mean, every religion is the piano. Every religion. But whether or not you ever get good at it, well, that's going to have different variables depending upon which way you decide to go about it. In my opinion, Catholicism is the more complete program for that, since that's the goal. But, other people might not do well with a more formal program like that. Maybe they do better with something that's a deviation. And let them have at it. I would say, well, I mean, it's riskier, but you could do it. It's not evil. It's not wrong. It's just maybe not the best way to achieve it. So that's kind of how I look at it. I look at all religion this way. And honestly, I'm also I'm a pragmatist, so I kind of look at it both ways and say, well, I want to study under the master pianist, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to bang around on it too. That's kind of how I look at it. So it's like, yes, I'm a Catholic bishop. That's where my focus is. I want that completeness. I see that as the more perfect path, but that doesn't mean that I can't gain benefit from studying Buddha or understanding Buddhism or Hinduism or any other religion.
Well, a lot of the opposition to that is based on fear.
Yes.
Like, it's like, what is your faith so listen, for some people this might be true. I think if your faith is in fact quite fragile, this is legitimate now. I'm not mocking people in this state.
Sure.
If your faith is fragile, you probably should stay with very narrow parameters around your life. Yeah. And I think that's what happens naturally. Like, people sort themselves into those camps. And if that's true for you, then that is true for you. But a lot of us have a very strong and deep faith. We all have different gifts. Faith is one of them. The capacity for faith is a gift. And actually, for those of us of deep faith, we're not threatened by these things. We're not going to suddenly go, I need to abandon the truth of Jesus Christ and, go and live on some yurt and do some odd thing.
Yeah.
So I think it does depend on the person. But what tends to happen is it tends to be the ones that have, very little capacity for difference that want to restrict everybody else because they assume that everybody else has the same risk exposure, and it's just not true. Some of us are better at handling risk and managing it. Jamie and I know all about that from the police. It's no different when it comes to our spirituality.
Yeah.
So for those of us who have a great capacity for that risk, in other words, we can take on all sorts of ideas and philosophies, and that's the point of studying, by the way. If we have that ability, it's not a risk for us.
I think that's,
don't worry about us. We'll be fine.
I think risk management is really the undoing of most people. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily something that people let themselves ever get good at, because they're too afraid of it, right? I mean, not just with religion, with everything. I mean, I think that's the major reason that there's so much poverty. And we can talk about, lack of opportunity and all of that, but ultimately, when you really break it down, okay, is that it's being risk adverse that keeps people poor, particularly in the first world. I mean, you can maybe get a pass in the third world. Yeah, okay, no opportunity to get ahead, so we get that. But in the first world, it's risk aversion. You're afraid to lose everything, so you stay in your box and you deal with mediocrity at best,
or you're being told you can't move out of that box, you're too risk adverse to actually challenge it. You can always break it down no matter how you want to look at it. But the fact of the matter is, that is why so many people are unhappy with their lives, because they're risk adverse and they're too afraid to actually be successful. They are. I think there's another thing that goes alongside that. Sorry, I'm only just thinking about these things. You're stimulating my brain. Is that one of the. I hate to keep criticizing people in the church, but I can't help it. But I point the fingers at myself too. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else, but it's a bit like tenured professors. Professors at universities were given tenure so that they could have freedom to speak out unpopular things. Of course, as Thomas Sowell said, it's harder to find a more frightened and weedy group of people than tenured professors. They don't actually do that, and I think that's crept in amongst the Christian clergy. That because here's where I'm coming from. I think that if you're a priest, religious, a bishop in the church, deacon in the church, you should. It should be a minimum expectation that you have the spiritual capacity to engage with, to be honest, anything philosophy, religion, spirituality can throw at you. You can engage with any of it without fear, and simultaneously be a person that says, but the truth is Jesus Christ. So you're unwavering about that, because when people come to your ministry, they don't want to hear, oh, I'm not really sure, we're journeying on a process. But I don't think that works. They need to know that, or people are seeking clarification when they come to, and I'm making a distinction between the ministers of the church and everybody else.
Yeah.
When they come to a minister of the church, they're actually seeking a clarification and an answer. Now, we know that answers are always provisional, and they're all, and they're always deeper than the surface. And I think you need to, for a minister of the church, you need to have both those things in tension, because then you can be a more effective pastor. Because if you just go, oh, I don't want to know about any of that stuff, which tends to happen to sort of fundamentalist types, then actually you can't engage with anybody that's outside your little crew. Simultaneously, if you're only syncretist, all paths lead to the same position, then you can't possibly be an evangelist for truth. And also you can't ever grow the church, because if all things are just the same, why on earth should anybody sacrifice their blood, treasure, or time investing in the Christian church? And I think really, what I'm describing is the heart of what has been the malaise for the church I can only speak for England and Australia, and tangentially America, Canada, and New Zealand. That's been the malaise, is that we've either had people too narrow or too broad. Yeah. What you need to have is a certainty and belief. People in the congregation can have all sorts of varying degrees of understanding, what have you.
Right.
A minimum expectation of the clergy is that they absolutely believe the creed, but also are spiritually developed enough to be able to encounter anybody when it comes to the life of faith.
I like that. And I would actually take it further and say that I think the creed is the bare minimum of calling oneself Christian, layperson or otherwise, I mean, or
That's
clergy
true.
or layperson is what I meant to say. I think, you can talk about different variations on what those things mean. And I don't think that necessarily negates or cancels out person's Christianity. But I don't think you can say that anything in the creed is wrong and still call yourself a Christian, which is why I reject the claim that Jehovah's Witness or Mormons have to the name Christian, because they reject elements of that creed. I'm sorry, you're something else. And I don't think you're bad. I'm just saying, stop calling yourself a Christian because you're not.
Wrong.
You're not a Christian.
You're not bad. You're wrong.
You're wrong. Yeah, and not necessarily wrong about what is. It's you just can't call yourself Christian. It's not what it is. That's not what a Christian is. Plain and simple. I wouldn't call myself a Jew just because I follow the Judeo-Christian worldview, and I see my spiritual foundation is coming from Judaism. That doesn't make me a Jew, just because I believe almost everything that they believe. You know what I mean? It's more nuanced than that. But there are certain things that are not negotiable. The creed is not negotiable, in my opinion. Everything else, yeah, okay. The dormition versus the assumption. I don't give a damn. I just don't give a damn.
That really is debating the number of angels on the head of a pin.
I know. Tell me about it. It's like, it doesn't matter. But if you want to have like a fun theological debate about it, eat your heart out if you want to. I don't think either perspective would keep you away from your claim to Christianity. It's certainly not going to interfere with your attainment of salvation.
Well, and the Catholic Church calls them both. Because Eastern Rite Catholics call it the Dormition.
Dormition still, yeah, because they don't really see a difference. I once asked a priest that once. I asked that when we were exploring the Eastern churches, my wife and I, and we were with the Ruthenians at this point. I asked my Ruthenian pastor when we were talking about the assumption versus the Dormition, and I said, so which one is it? And he goes, is there a difference? And I said, I'm not so sure there is. And he goes, because there really isn't. It's just a different way of framing it. Now, where the difference, of course, comes from, is really in how one wants to understand salvation, or how Mary's salvation was achieved. And there's different theological ways of explaining that. The same thing with the Immaculate Conception. That's another one, right? If you're looking at the universe as an Orthodox person does, as being where the corruption is, not within the individual, but within the universe, and then the individual becomes corrupted because they become part of the universe, or they're born into it. They're born into the fallen universe. Then I can see where you'd say, well, we're all born immaculately. There's nothing special about being born immaculately. What's special about Mary at this point is she continued to maintain it. But when you're Roman, when you're Western Church, Roman Catholic, whatever, and your theology is that the stain is on you, that it's a stain on your soul, and that we corrupt the universe through ourselves. Well, then, being born immaculately is really profound, right? So that's where these kind of theological differences come from. But do they intrinsically matter to whether or not one's Christian, whether or not one achieves salvation? Of course not. But not negotiable is the creed. You can't say you do not believe in the resurrection of the dead and still call yourself Christian. I'm sorry, you can't. You can't say you believe in multiple baptisms and call yourself Christian. You can't. You might be something, but you're not Christian. You're something else. You're something else. And we see that kind of stuff.
You can't call a Ford a Cadillac.
No. I mean, because it isn't, right?
Well, you can, but it doesn't make it so.
Right, it doesn't make it so. That's right. It doesn't make it so. So there, that's just I don't know. I mean, that's a pet peeve of mine because I find people. I've got a very narrow. I mean, I should say I have a very opposite of narrow. I have a very a vast range of tolerability for what I would classify as heresy. I enjoy the Gnostic texts. I see spiritual value there. I don't see them as authoritative in any way. I wouldn't read them at mass, but I do see the intrinsic spiritual value. I can see why these were cherished.
I can see why they were restricted back in time.
Yes.
where most people were not educated
and not ready
it
for
could
that.
Easily lead a lot of people astray.
Exactly.
But actually, we don't live in those times now.
No.
So I read them.
Yeah.
They're interesting.
They're beautiful. I mean,
And by the way, if you read them, they're beautiful and all the rest of it. But actually, when you've read them, you go, I can see why these aren't in the canon. Like, they're just not as good.
They're not. Well, they're also several hundred years newer, so they're not as close to the source material. You can tell they were sort of imaginative musings on the subject that led to different types of philosophical what ifs. And I think that most of the Nag Hammadi is about a lot of what ifs. But they are interesting. Not authoritative.
Imaginings.
Yeah, they're imaginings, and perhaps that makes good spirituality. I mean, it does because it can lead you into a type of encounter with God that otherwise you might not have received. And I certainly found some intrinsic value there, which is why I enjoy them and I cherish them. But I don't see them as.
But then with theologians, it's not for everybody.
No,
it's kind of
that's
we're
right.
Interested in that.
You're right. You're right. I mean, you do have to have, I think, a certain foundation, a prerequisite foundation to be able to tackle this material and be not led astray by it or confused by it. I don't think anybody should pick up a Nag Hammadi and start reading it.
But I think if you are the sort of person that's interested in those things, you have a responsibility. This is true of any academic subject, by the way. But you have a responsibility to do that in an ordered way, and if you are a Christian, then you should do that in a guided way. That well, put it this way: if I read the Nag Hammadi scriptures and said, "Oh, I've realised now the Catholic Church is wrong about X, Y, and Z,"
Yeah, right.
then I'm not engaging in the kenotic life. Like, I'm thinking, I've come across something that disproves the Catholic Church. Is like, do you know what? I think there's quite a lot of really smart theologians in the Catholic Church over the past 1,000 years who might have read it too.
Yeah.
So just calm down.
I mean, I think that's you just brought up something that really has always bothered me is the arrogance of contemporary man to, read scripture and think that they got, religion figured out better than the fathers of the church, who in some cases even knew the people that knew Jesus, and you're thinking that, in your modern day where you're worried about your job and paying your stupid bills and living your stupid life, that you spend so much time on that in your little armchair philosophy that you spend maybe an hour at night reading, that you're going to challenge a mind like Athanasius, Origen. I mean, some of these guys that dedicated all of their time to the pursuit of this and were closer to the source material, could talk to people that knew something or saw something. How dare
original ideas are very, very rare.
Yeah.
And so and the only way you can know if you've had an original idea, this is the whole point of PhDs, right?
Yeah.
The only way you can know if you've had an original idea is to exhaust your mind trying to find somebody somewhere who said it before you.
Yeah. So it irritates the hell out of me when people say that, no, this is wrong. It's like the whole foundation, for example, of the evangelical movement.
I was just about to say, but it's how Protestantism has turned in on itself.
Yes.
Because, if you look at the origins of Protestant, what became the Protestant movement, like Martin Luther, for example. Martin Luther was going back to the church fathers to challenge what was going wrong in contemporary Catholic practice.
He was trying to save the church.
And now we've got a situation where Protestants are sort of superstitiously scared of the church fathers. So, and they say, it's a Bible only, no tradition, no church, or not apostolic. And how can you not believe in tradition and the church, but believe in the Bible? Where do you think it came from? Like, I mean, it's such backward thinking, or sorry, reverse thinking, that it's hard to engage with, and it's why they're wrong. It's unpopular to say that some things right and some things are wrong, but I'm going to say it. But I'm not saying it. I'm agreeing with the church's position that is a wrong way of thinking.
Well, I just don't think that we can challenge the established origin point. I think you can argue about like things that are not clear, sure. But the things that led to the Reformation were clear. I mean, I'm not talking about like the selling of indulgences and what inspired Luther to do what he did. I'm talking about everything that happened after that. To challenge things like tradition, to get into things like sola fide, and claim that.
Which isn't a scriptural argument.
Right. Which isn't. I mean, very much not a scriptural argument. I mean, the scripture actually says the complete opposite of that. But, but to think that 1,500 years later, that somehow you're so much smarter than the guys that came up with this stuff, I mean, is really the epitome of arrogance. And it still lives in today's time, not so much with the Protestants, but now with the evangelicals.
Maybe we've made a connection here because, we were talking earlier on about, what's happened post iPhones, basically post the internet. What Luther, it's no coincidence that Luther, or the effects of Luther's actions, coincide with the invention of the printing press.
Yes.
So, and that's what allows this to sort of, be a fire that rages throughout the known world at the time.
Yeah.
And the internet is like the invention of the printing press, except on steroids. Yeah. So it's no surprise that we've had this massive disruption to our culture, to our philosophy, to religion, to the way we think. Because actually previously, I mean, I remember it, because when I was a Baptist, Protestants would talk about, some Catholics might be Christians. That's their kind of position. Like, they've got all the truth and they're passing judgment on other people. Well, the invention of the internet has blown that to pieces.
Yeah.
Because they can see, and by the way, vice versa, in Catholic countries, they can see that Protestantism is not just merely, a complete heresy and they're all worshiping the devil. Actually, they can see that there's sincere Christian belief within Protestant groups as well. So, it's kind of because it's removed the gatekeepers and opened the doors to people whose language you don't speak or whose experience you have never previously known before. Because those are now open, that's why we have this massive disruption and why we have this response that's going on. And we're still figuring it out. And actually, it'll be in 1,000 years' time, hopefully. Well, unless our Lord has come before then, which would be a great thing. People will look back and look at it the same way we're looking at Luther now.
Yeah. I mean, which
is why you have to have humility. You have to have humility.
It is humility.
Only in our time and space.
That's what
humility is the answer to this.
Yes, it is humility. I think when you look at what keeps people from returning to the church or even wanting to be part of the church, ultimately, when you really get in there and you have these conversations, it always absolutely returns to a lack of humility point within the individual. Every single time. Even if it's something as simple as I don't want to be bothered. I mean, well, that is a lack of humility too, because if you were more humble, then you'd understand your obligation. So, okay, let's say you don't like the church, right? Let's say, the people suck. The priest sucks. The whole thing sucks. You hate it.
Always been true, by the way. That's always been true.
Always been true. I mean, believe me, I didn't get to where I'm at. I didn't get to where I'm at loving what it was like, okay? I mean, honestly.
Me neither.
So why am I here? All right, which should be the answer to that everybody has. It should be the same answer. Okay, the reason I'm here is that I realized at some point I'm not trying to say, look at me, look how great I am. I have so much, I'm lacking in humility. That's not what I'm arguing. But what I am saying is I woke up one day and I realized that going to church wasn't so much about my salvation. It was about being available for everyone else's. And that's why I did what I did. And that took a selflessness, an act of selflessness to maintain. And most people just don't want, they're like, I don't need to go to church. I've got the woods in the backyard. I can go and pray anywhere. It's like, well, good for you. Well, what are you doing for everyone else though? I'm glad you're okay, but what are you doing for everyone else? Because church isn't about you. It isn't about your salvation. It's about everyone else's salvation. And their salvation's about you. They don't know you because you didn't let them know you.
That's why it's called a community.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's what Christ is trying to achieve with the church, or what he established a church to achieve. What the apostles are trying to achieve, and we're miserably failing at it, but not so bad because we're still here. So,
but it is, you're absolutely right. And the reminder that Jesus left us with a church, not with a book.
Right.
I mean, I've said it before, and it's not my idea. Jesus only wrote once that we know of in his life. It was in the sand when a woman was caught in adultery, and we don't know what it said.
No.
But we know we have the writings and manifestos of Chairman Mao.
There is
Pol Pot, of Stalin.
There is a tradition, though, an unwritten tradition, I guess you could say, an oral tradition about what was actually written.
And I like
it was all the sins of everybody that was standing there. And when they looked and they saw that he knew their sins, that's why they walked away, because it shamed them. I mean, they realized, my God,
he could have written pride, right?
Yeah, that would have been everyone's sin. And who knows? There's also some biblical scholars say that was a scribal edition that came, decades later. It is true, the earliest manuscripts do not contain the story.
But he didn't write a manifesto. Other people, like he gave the Sermon on the Mount, which, especially post-Christian lefties try to use as a manifesto, to live by without the faith, without sacrificing anything or believing anything. But Jesus didn't write that down.
Right.
It was written down by other people who were inspired by him. And so, because he wasn't a despot. That's the whole point. Right. Service of God is perfect freedom. So it's not like Mao's little green book. It's way better. And the reason that it has a greater effect, apart from the fact that it's God behind it, is that coercion can't be part of it. Yeah. It's handed on by sinful, hopeless men. And that's why we can assent to it. And that's why the church, being imperfect, still has the salvific power to achieve what it was designed to achieve, despite all its flaws, and despite all the flaws of everyone who runs it and attends it, but that's it. And I mean, we came here to talk about astrology. We ended up talking about theology. I mean, that's just the way it goes in the show. And it was a good show. And next week it gets even more theological, because we'll be talking about the Old Testament, some new perspectives on it, which should be, actually, it's going to be new perspectives on the 10 Commandments specifically, I believe. That will be next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. We should have our brand new 1 gigabyte up and down fiber connection. Wow. So I'm looking forward to it. And if it's not good enough, I can go to 2 gigabytes up and down. I can, and I will, if it causes me issues. You'll have to have a libation to celebrate. I will. Okay, we'll open something up for that one. Some libations. Maybe that's why this season's been shit. It kind of helps. It usually does. I'm willing to make that sacrifice. Anyway, thank you, moderators. Thank you, Brandon, Father Chris, Jamie. Thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. We'll be back next week. Take care. God bless, and I'll see you out there in the ether.